Japan's secret. $2.1 billion underground tsunami barrier exposed. The system that's supposed to save 4 million people has a fatal flaw. Nearly 400 kilometers of concrete seawalls now line Japan's northeast coast. These massive barriers were supposed to stop tsunamis. They're supposed to protect 4 million people. They're supposed to be the answer to Japan's greatest natural fear. But a decade after Japan spent nearly $12 billion on the Great Seawall and billions more on underground flood control systems like the GCANs, Tokyo's massive underground temple of pumps and cisterns, scientists and disaster experts are saying something shocking. The barriers might actually make the next disaster worse. Way worse. Think about that. Japan built the world's largest tsunami defense network, and it might be the reason more people die next time. This is the story of how a nation's best intentions created a catastrophe waiting to happen. This is the story of concrete walls and false hope. March 11th, 2011, 3 p.m. in Japan. Thousands of people were at work, at home, going about their normal Tuesday. The Tohoku earthquake hit with such force that it shifted the Earth's axis. The magnitude was 9.1, one of the 5 most powerful earthquakes ever recorded in human history. A magnitude 9 earthquake doesn't just shake the ground, it ruptures the entire seafloor. A section of the Pacific Ocean floor the size of a small country dropped suddenly. And when all that water above it dropped with it, the physics of the ocean created something that would reshape Japanese history. A tsunami. The waves that followed weren't normal. In some areas, the tsunami reached 40 meters high. That's 130 feet, taller than a 13-story building, moving at over 500 miles per hour. Imagine standing in front of something that tall, something that fast, something that weighs millions of tons. Now imagine that thing made entirely of water, and it's coming at you. In some prefectures, the wave reached even higher. In Iwata Prefecture, the tsunami measured at nearly 40 meters. In other locations, it was 13 to 14 meters, still a 6-story building of water. The waves didn't just flood the coast, they obliterated it. They erased towns from maps, they carried ships inland and left them on hillsides. They killed nearly 20,000 people, and they did something that shocked every engineer and scientist in Japan. They overtopped nearly every seawall the nation had built. For decades, Japan invested in coastal defenses. There were seawalls. They stood 12 meters high in many locations, 4 stories of concrete. The foundations went 25 meters deep. Engineers studied tsunami heights. They examined historical records going back centuries. They calculated what the worst-case scenario would be, and they built walls they believed would hold. But the tsunami of 2011 wasn't the worst case they imagined. It was worse. Some areas were hit by waves taller than the walls. Some areas were hit by waves that were nearly as tall. In Fukushima, in Miyagi, in Iwate, the prefecture's hardest hit, the seawalls that were supposed to be the ultimate defense simply weren't high enough. In some places, the concrete barriers were crushed completely, shattered by the force of water. Entire sections of seawall collapsed into rubble. The infrastructure that was supposed to be the ultimate defense became evidence of a failed strategy. But here's where the story gets truly insane. Instead of asking whether seawalls were the right strategy at all, instead of wondering if concrete barriers were really the best way to protect 4 million people living on tsunami-prone coasts, Japan did what it always does after a disaster. It doubled down. It went bigger. It went more expensive. It went all in on a strategy that scientists were starting to question. Between 2011 and the present day, the nation has constructed or rebuilt 396 kilometers of tsunami barriers. That's nearly 246 miles of solid concrete. To put that in perspective, that's the distance from San Francisco to Los Angeles. That's longer than the entire coast of Delaware, and it's all concrete, all meant to hold back the ocean. It's an investment of faith in engineering on a scale that's difficult to comprehend. The construction sites became iconic. Along the Miyagi coast, you could see massive concrete forms being poured. In Iwate, workers operated massive cranes. In Fukushima, the entire coastline was being reshaped. The construction took years. Some walls were finished. Some are still being completed. The scale was enormous. It was the kind of project that you only see once or twice in a century. It was the kind of commitment that says we will not let this happen again. We will not be vulnerable again. We will not let the ocean win again. The specifications of this Great Wall of Japan are almost incomprehensible in their scale. The tallest sections of seawall rise to 15.5 meters, over 50 feet tall. Imagine standing next to a 5-story building. That's how high these walls are. They're anchored with foundations that dig 25 meters into the earth. That's deeper than an 8-story building is tall, but it's going down, not up. In some locations, the walls curve and angle, designed by engineers to deflect wave force. In other locations, they're pure vertical concrete. Each section is built to withstand specific wave heights based on historical data and computer models. And the total cost for this network was around $12 billion. $12 billion. That's more than the entire GDP of dozens of countries. That's more than the annual budget of most US states. It's a number so large it's almost meaningless to most people. And here's what gets buried deep in the technical reports, what almost nobody in the general population knows. The government knew these walls still wouldn't be high enough for the absolute worst-case scenario. Scientists working on the Nankai Trough, a massive underwater fault line that everyone in Japan fears, calculated that an earthquake there could produce waves up to 100 feet tall. 100 feet. Higher than a 10-story building. Higher than the Statue of Liberty. Higher than any seawall in existence. The seawalls, even at their maximum height, wouldn't stop those waves. They might reduce the force. They might buy a few extra minutes. But they wouldn't stop the water. And the government knew this when they were building them. But they built them anyway. They built the seawalls anyway, knowing they couldn't handle the worst case. But the seawalls are only half of Japan's defense strategy. In Tokyo and the surrounding areas, the government built something different, something that exists in a different dimension than the walls above ground. It's called GCANs, officially known as the Metropolitan Area Outer Underground Discharge Channel. This system is so massive, so otherworldly in its scale, that when tourists visit it, they describe the experience like stepping into an alien world. Imagine 5 concrete tubes. Each one is 65 meters tall, that's 213 feet, taller than the Statue of Liberty. Each one is 32 meters wide, 105 feet. Now connect those 5 giant tubes with 6.4 kilometers of tunnels running 50 meters beneath the Earth's surface. That's nearly 4 miles of tunnels, deep underground, designed specifically for water to flow through. In the main chamber of the GCAN system, there's a room so vast that it's difficult to photograph because cameras can't capture the full scale. The engineers built 59 reinforced concrete pillars inside this chamber. 59 pillars just to hold up the roof. Each pillar weighs 500 tons. Do you know what 500 tons weighs? It's equivalent to 100 African elephants stacked on top of each other per pillar. The room is 25.4 meters tall and 177 meters long. That's like having a cathedral underground, a place of worship dedicated entirely to the control of water. The system took 14 years to build, from 1992 to 2006. It cost approximately $2.6 billion. The project required thousands of workers. Some workers spent years in tunnels, in the darkness, 50 meters below the surface, pouring concrete and installing equipment. Here's how the GCANs actually works. During normal weather, it does nothing. The system sits, waiting. a massive empty cavity beneath Tokyo. But when extreme rain comes, when typhoons hit, when rivers start to overflow dangerously, something activates. Water from Tokyo's rivers, the Naka River, the Kuramatsu River, and others, flows through channels, accelerates, and drops down into these massive underground silos. Gravity pulls the water down through tunnels. The water fills the chambers, storing millions of gallons. And then, when it's safe to release the water, when the rivers have subsided and can handle additional flow, giant pumps activate. These aren't small pumps. They're industrial-scale pumps that can move millions of gallons per hour. They push the stored water into the Edo River, which can handle the flow without flooding nearby communities. It's like having a massive pressure relief valve, but that valve is underground, hidden, serving 37 million people in the Tokyo metropolitan area. When the system is empty, and it's usually empty, tour groups visit it. Visitors put on safety helmets and harnesses. They descend into the depths on metal stairs, dropping down through darkness, passing through concrete tunnels that twist and turn. They walk into chambers so large that their footsteps echo across space. They stand in rooms where the far wall is barely visible in the distance. Photographers try to capture the scale and fail because the chambers are too vast for normal cameras. One visitor described the experience as walking into the world's largest parking garage, except instead of concrete for cars, it's concrete for water. Another described it as a fortress, as if the entire city of Tokyo had built an underground stronghold against nature itself. Tourists use words like alien and surreal. They take selfies in front of 500-ton concrete pillars that exist solely to hold up a ceiling. The Japanese government marketed this as the future of disaster prevention. Combined with the seawalls, Japan would be protected. The narrative was clear. We have the money, we have the engineers, we have the technology. We are safe. But in universities in Japan and around the world, scientists started asking a question that the government really didn't want to hear. What if the seawalls are making things worse? What if, in trying to build bigger barriers, Japan had actually created a false sense of security that would cost lives? The research started coming in. It was subtle at first. Studies from disaster psychology showed that people living in protected areas behind seawalls, had different evacuation behaviors than people in unprotected areas. When you live behind a barrier that your government tells you will protect you, you believe it. You have faith in the concrete. And when you have faith in the concrete, you don't run. You wait. The numbers were shocking when the full research was published. Studies found that residents living behind seawalls were 60% more likely to delay evacuation during a tsunami warning. 60%. Think about what that means. Imagine 100 people living behind a seawall. 60 of them will wait. They'll wait to see if the seawall works. They'll wait to see if the government was telling the truth. They'll wait, and many of them will be still waiting when the water comes. Some residents didn't evacuate at all. They trusted the engineers. They trusted the concrete. They trusted the projections and the calculations and the promises made by the government. And when the barrier failed, or when the water came over the top, they were still in their homes. Still in the tsunami zone, still in danger. Some of them are still there in the ground, victims of the belief that concrete could save them. This behavioral pattern is documented in disaster psychology literature. When people believe in a physical protection system, their willingness to evacuate decreases. Their sense of urgency goes down. They're more likely to gather belongings. They're more likely to wait for family members. They're more likely to check on neighbors. Every minute they save doing these things is a minute they're losing in evacuation time. And when a tsunami is coming, minutes matter. Seconds matter. The difference between running immediately and waiting just 1 minute can be the difference between survival and drowning. Japan built the walls to protect people, but the walls also protected people's confidence. And confidence can be deadly. There's something even more dangerous that lives in textbooks and engineering reports, something that almost nobody talks about in public discussions. If a seawall is tall enough and strong enough to hold back part of the water, but not tall enough to hold it all, the physics of the situation becomes deadly. Imagine a dam. Water builds up behind the dam. The pressure increases with every second. The water is trapped, held back by concrete and engineering and centuries of faith in human ability to control nature. But what happens when the dam fails? If the seawall gets breached, if it cracks, if it collapses, that water that was trapped behind it doesn't just flow onto the land normally. It releases with catastrophic force. The pressure that was building up for those few minutes gets released all at once. The water that was held back becomes a weapon, a compressed surge of force that can devastate an area far more severely than the original tsunami would have. Scientists call this a dam break scenario. When you release water from behind a barrier, the force is multiplied. The water moves faster. The damage is worse. The destruction is more complete. Japanese officials don't talk about this in their public reports. But it's a risk that's baked into every seawall on the coast. It's a scenario that keeps disaster prevention engineers awake at night. Because if the worst-case scenario happens, if the Nankai Trough ruptures and sends 100-foot waves at a coast that has barriers not high enough to stop them, what happens when those barriers break? The reason Japan is terrified, the true reason, is something called the Nankai Trough. This is not theoretical danger. This is not a maybe. This is a massive geological fault line that runs along the southern coast of Japan, roughly 100 kilometers offshore. For centuries, Japanese scientists have studied earthquakes. They've looked at the historical record. They've found evidence of previous Nankai Trough ruptures going back hundreds of years. And they've made a calculation that keeps them awake at night. The Nankai Trough is capable of producing an earthquake around magnitude 9.1. That's basically the same power as the Tohoku earthquake that killed 20,000 people. That's a rupture event that would affect an area 4 times the size of what was affected in 2011. That's a disaster that would reach inland farther, last longer, and create more waves than the disaster that killed 20,000 people. The government's latest estimates, released in 2025, predict what would happen if the Nankai Trough ruptured completely. The tsunami waves could reach nearly 100 feet in height. 100 feet. Let me put that in perspective. That's taller than the Statue of Liberty. It's taller than a 10-story building. It's taller than the seawalls Japan has been building for the last decade. It's a wall of water so high that people standing on the ground would look up at it and see something that blocks out the sky. And here's the estimate for what happens. Around 298,000 people would die in Japan. That's 298,000 people. That's not an estimate of maybe. That's a calculation based on population density, building construction standards, evacuation rates, and the speed at which water can travel. It takes into account historical evacuation patterns, the time people will spend making decisions, the time they'll spend gathering family members, the time they'll spend convincing themselves that the warning is real. And even with all those time losses, the calculation still comes back to nearly 300,000 dead. The economic damage is estimated at 169.5 trillion yen, over $1.5 trillion. Let me put that in perspective as well. That's more than 11 times the annual budget of Japan's entire healthcare system. That's equivalent to the total economic value created by some of the richest countries in the world, erased, in minutes, by water. That's buildings destroyed, businesses ended, lives ruined, families torn apart. Some economists think the number is too low. They point out that Japan's interconnected economy means that a disaster of this scale wouldn't just destroy the affected areas. It would ripple outward. Manufacturing would stop. Global supply chains would break. The effects would be felt around the world. What's more unsettling is that this isn't a distant future threat. The Japanese government's Earthquake Research Committee recently stated in official government documents released to the public that there's an 80% chance of a massive Nankai Trough earthquake occurring within the next 30 years. Not maybe, not possibly, 80% probability. That's nearly the same as a coin landing heads. But instead of a coin, it's an earthquake that will kill 298,000 people. In a 30-year window, which means children born today will potentially experience this in their lifetime, there's an 80% chance. Some Japanese cities are starting to realize what the research is showing. The city of Tsunami in Miyagi Prefecture, a city directly hit by the 2011 tsunami, directly resisted the Great Wall of Japan mentality. Instead of building massive barriers, they invested in evacuation routes, warning systems, and training. They educated people about how to escape, not about how a wall will save them. They built pathways up to higher ground. They installed warning sirens. They practiced evacuation drills. They created a culture where the only acceptable response to a tsunami warning is to move immediately, quickly, away from the coast. And when disaster prevention experts study which strategy works better, the Great Wall approach or the Tsunami approach, the answer keeps coming back to the same conclusion. Evacuation is more reliable than barriers. Evacuation is more effective than concrete. If you tell people the wall will protect them, they don't run. They wait. They trust the concrete. And when the concrete fails, they're standing next to it when the water comes. But if you teach people that the only real protection is speed, if you build a culture where evacuation is the only accepted strategy, people run. They run because they don't believe in the wall. They run because they don't trust the concrete. They run because their government has told them that their own 2 feet are the only real defense. Japan spent over $12 billion on the visible seawalls. It spent another $2.6 billion on underground systems. It spent another fortune on warning systems and sirens and education programs. The investment is enormous. The commitment is real. The engineering is world-class. But research suggests that the most effective defense, the system that actually saves lives, is free. It costs nothing. It costs $0. It's just the decision to run. It's teaching people that no barrier made by humans can hold back the ocean forever. It's creating a culture where the natural response to danger is movement, immediately, with urgency. Some cities learned this lesson, many haven't. Some communities are comfortable behind their seawalls. Some people believe in the barriers. And that's what makes the next disaster so uncertain. Because when the Nankai Trough ruptures, when the waves come, the outcome will depend entirely on behavior. The seawall will stand, or it won't. The G-cans will fill, or it won't. But whether Japan's 4 million people in the danger zone survive won't depend on the walls, the pumps, or the underground temples. It will depend on whether they run. If that blew your mind, every subscriber is automatically entered in our monthly giveaway for a branded hoodie. Details in the description. Some cities are changing their strategies now. Miyagi is reevaluating. Iwate is investing in more evacuation drills. Fukushima is experimenting with hybrid approaches, keeping some seawalls but focusing more heavily on evacuation infrastructure. But it's slow. Change in government policy is slow, and the 80% probability doesn't care about government timelines. The earthquake could come tomorrow. It could come in 20 years. It could come in 29 years and 364 days. But somewhere in the next 3 decades, there's an 80% chance that the Nankai Trough will rupture. Scientists will argue about this. Engineers will defend the seawalls and point to the money invested, the technology deployed, the miles of concrete poured. The government will point to the evacuation programs they've created. They'll point to the warning systems and the sirens and the drills. And they'll be right that these things help. But the truth is that we won't know until it happens. Until the Nankai Trough ruptures. until the waves that nobody wants to contemplate start moving toward the coast, until the moment when everything Japan built is measured against everything the ocean can do. At that moment, when the warning sirens sound and people have seconds to decide whether to run or to trust the walls, Japan's greatest disaster prevention investment might become its greatest vulnerability. The confidence built by the walls could kill people. The false security could delay evacuation. The trust could cost lives. And if stories like this remind you that the unexpected can arrive without warning, grab your free disaster preparedness toolkit. The link is in the description. Stay prepared. Stay alert. Think about your own community. Does it have seawalls that might create false confidence? Does it have evacuation routes? Do you know where to run? Because the barriers are waiting, the pumps are waiting, and the ocean is always waiting. The earthquake is coming. The question is, when it arrives, will you run? Or will you wait to see if the barriers hold?